The situation in Ireland has escalated to a critical point. What began as a peaceful demonstration quickly turned into an open confrontation between citizens and security forces. Dozens of residents, many of them entire families, took to the streets to protest what they see as an unacceptable imposition by the government. The mass arrival of migrants into small communities without prior consultation or preparation. The cries of protest soon blended with shoving, arrests, and scuffles. The footage shows men and women resisting police intervention, their faces marked by anger, frustration, and fear. For many, this is not just a disagreement over immigration policy, but something deeper, a complete disconnect between the central government and the residents of towns who feel their voices have been silenced. For months, various rural areas have received large groups of migrants, housed in hotels closed to tourism, makeshift civic centers, and even school gyms. Most of these relocations have taken place without any notice to locals, who only find out when it's already too late. That lack of transparency has created a dangerous mix of uncertainty, resentment, and fear of a forced transformation of their social environment. For the protesters, this is not about rejecting people, but about defending their way of life. They argue that the social fabric of their towns is being altered at a pace they cannot absorb, and that the state has chosen to ignore the consequences. While authorities insist on the need to fulfill humanitarian commitments, residents feel their reality has been pushed aside. The scenes of confrontation during the protest are just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath them lies a growing sense of abandonment, a belief that decisions are being made behind closed doors, without listening to the common citizen. And when that citizen finally decides to speak out, the institutional response is not dialogue, but a police presence. In recent weeks, tension has become constant. These are no longer isolated incidents. Similar protests have erupted across various counties in the country, with banners, slow-moving caravans, and spontaneous roadblocks. But something about this particular case marked a turning point. For the first time, the state responded with visibly heavy-handed force, as if the residents of these towns were enemies of public order. The official narrative speaks of necessary measures to protect migrants and prevent hate speech. But on the ground, protesters insist that this is merely an excuse to avoid addressing the real issue. They are not demanding the expulsion of anyone. They are demanding to be included in the decisions that directly affect their lives. They say no one asked them if they wanted their only hotel turned into a permanent shelter, nor whether they were prepared for such a sudden demographic shift. It just happened. And that, they say, is what hurts the most. The imposition. At one of the most tense moments of the standoff, an elderly man, sun-scorched face, calloused workers' hands, shouted through tears, "They're stealing our own country from us." Around him, applause and cries of "listen to us," blended with the buzz of helicopters and the thunder of police boots. Cameras captured everything, but mainstream media chose either silence or sugar-coated versions referring to radicalized groups. That's precisely what many are denouncing, that media coverage is aligned with the official narrative. Instead of showing the roots of the unrest, it focuses on the moments of tension, without explaining how things got to this point. Locals feel a fundamental pact has been broken. The right to be heard, to take part in shaping the future of their communities, has been replaced by technocratic decisions made in Dublin, far away, in offices without windows to the Irish countryside. Social media has become the only space where the other version of events is shared. Phone-recorded videos show the raw reality. Women being shoved, youths dragged across the ground, parents trying to shield their children from tear gas. What some call a containment operation, others see as a symbol that the government is no longer protecting them, but repressing them. The phrase most often seen on walls, banners, and posts is clear. It's not racism, it's common sense. For many of these citizens, the problem is not with migrants themselves, but with a system that imposes without consulting, that transforms their surroundings without considering the impact, and then labels them as intolerant for daring to speak up. As the afternoon wore on, the tension only continued to grow. The atmosphere thickened. Some demonstrators tried to calm things down and called for dialogue, but others no longer trusted the promises of officials. "If they won't listen to us now, when will they?" shouted a young woman with her face covered. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Because for her and for many others, this wasn't just a protest. It was the last chance to reclaim something they felt was slipping away. As the sun began to set behind the hills, the atmosphere in the village grew even more tense. The blue lights of police patrols lit up the aged stone walls and the shuttered windows with their drawn curtains. Locals, many of them lifelong residents, stood shoulder to shoulder facing a police line that looked more suited for an anti-terror operation than a civilian protest. Their faces showed exhaustion, but also an unshakable resolve. In silence, some held up handmade signs. "We weren't consulted. We want answers. Listen to the people." Others shouted hoarse chants, as if each word were an act of resistance against institutional neglect. And though some media outlets tried to reduce the protest to an act of intolerance, what was unfolding there had far deeper roots. It was a desperate cry to regain control over what, until recently, had been their home. The testimonies gathered that night reflected a pattern repeated across Ireland. Small villages with fragile infrastructures suddenly expected to absorb dozens, sometimes hundreds of people without any preparation. Overcrowded schools, overwhelmed rural clinics, shops unable to keep up with demand. "It's not that we don't want to help," said a mother holding her 5-year-old daughter. "It's that we simply can't take any more, and no one up there seems to understand that." Meanwhile, images began circulating on social media that were nowhere to be seen on the evening news. An elderly woman being shoved by an officer, a young man handcuffed as his mother screamed, and a group of senior citizens surrounded by a police cordon as they tried to approach the community center where the new arrivals had been housed. The contrast was jarring. In those images, the official narrative of inclusion and cooperation collapsed like a house of cards. As night wore on, the confrontation became more than just physical. It turned symbolic. This was no longer merely a protest against immigration policy. It was a direct challenge to a system of governance that, according to demonstrators, had completely lost touch with the social base it once claimed to represent. "They call us racists, so they don't have to listen to us," shouted a retired teacher, surrounded by his former students, all standing in a light drizzle. "But we're the same people who built this country when no one believed in it, and now we're the enemy." Several local officials tried to step in to calm the crowd, but were met with cold silence. The protesters didn't want scripted speeches or promises of future reviews. They wanted real decisions, genuine participation, and above all, respect. The idea that democracy only exists on election day had become unbearable for many. "They govern us like we're children who need correcting," said a middle-aged woman, "but we're adults, voters, workers, parents. We deserve to be taken seriously." The contrast with official rhetoric was becoming impossible to ignore. While the government repeated talking points about tolerance, solidarity, and humanitarian duty, a different reality was unfolding on the ground, one of uprooting, growing resentment, and a deep sense of abandonment. And this wasn't just ideological. For many, it was also a battle for cultural survival. "Ireland is changing so fast, we don't even recognize it anymore," said a young farmer, soaked by the rain, his voice cracking from shouting. "And the problem is, no one ever asked us if we wanted that change." By dawn, many were still out on the streets, with blankets draped over their shoulders and thermoses of tea being passed from hand to hand. It was no longer just a protest. It had become a vigil, a waiting. Some wept silently. Others sang traditional Irish songs as a reminder of what they feel is at stake. For them, this isn't about statistics or international treaties. It's about identity, about belonging, about feeling that the place where they grew up hasn't been taken from them, without warning, without dialogue, without even an explanation. And while the government insists that everything is under control, the truth is that in towns like this, the fracture between those who govern and those who are governed is increasingly evident. The question many are now asking is, how long can this divide be contained? Because what started here as a local grievance could evolve into something far deeper if it continues to be ignored. If you want to keep discovering what's really happening without filters or prepackaged narratives, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video. See you in the next one.